Chapter the 14th. How to Train Your Dragon. Quirrell, however, must have had more balls than they thought. Snape was still hanging around, so it would appear as though he hadn't cracked yet. Every time they passed the third-floor corridor, Harry, Ron, and Hermione would sneak through the tapestry and press their ears to the door to check that Fuzzy was still snarling inside. Whenever Harry passed Quirrell these days, he gave him an encouraging smile and a pat on the back, and Ron started leaving books on how to stand up to bullies behind in his classes. Hermione, however, had more important things on her mind than that silly old sorcerer's bone. She had started drawing up rigorous study schedules and color-coding all her notes. Harry and Ron wouldn't have minded, but she kept screaming at them to do the same. Hermione, the exams are ages away. 10 weeks. Hermione snapped. That's not ages. That's right around the corner. Ron yawned. Why are you even studying? You already know it's going to be an A. Why am I studying? Are you insane? You realize we need to pass these exams with flying colors to get into the second year? They're very significant. I should have started studying 4 months ago. I don't know what's gotten into me. Unfortunately, the teachers seemed to be thinking right up Hermione's alley. They stacked on so much homework the Easter holidays weren't exactly what you would call a holiday. The annual first year's Easter egg hunt was the only bright spot, a tradition at the school. Though many of the students complained that Harry cheated when he used his broom to zoom around and collect many more eggs than the others. It was also hard to relax with Hermione next to you reciting the 12 uses of human blood or practicing wand movements hitting you in the head every so often. Moaning and whining, Harry spent most of his free time in the library with her, trying to get her to do all his extra work. I'll never get through all of this, Ron burst out one afternoon, throwing Quill down in frustration and stomped off towards the window in anger. It was the first really fine day they'd had in months, and being cooped up inside all the time got to him. The sky was a clear, cornflower blue, and the air gave a hint that summer was coming. Harry, who was bored out of his mind looking up random plants in 100,001 magical herbs and fungi, didn't look up until he heard Ron say from across the room, Hagrid. Why on earth are you in the library? I thought you couldn't read. Hagrid shimmied into view. He looked very out of place in his Dalmatian overcoat. Oh, just poking round, he said, in a shifty voice that got their interest at once. And what a year up to. He looked tremendously suspicious. You're not still looking for that blasted Nicholas Flamel, are ye? Oh, we found out his little secret ages ago, said Ron triumphantly. Your ghastly dog's guarding the sorcerer's bow. Shhhhh. Hagrid looked around quickly to see if anyone was listening. Madam Prince squinted at them from her desk. Don't go a-shouting about it so all o' England can hear ye. What's the matter with ye? Hagrid slapped Ron upside the head. We are going to ask you some more questions about it, and there's nothing you can do to stop us, said Harry as he approached with Hermione, about what's guarding the bone apart from Fuzzy. Shhhh, said Hagrid again, flailing his arms every which way. Sweat began forming around this face. Listen, come and see me later, I'm not promising I'll tell you anything, mind, but don't go gabbing about it to others, no one's supposed to know ye know. They'll think I've spilled the beans. Well, you did. But we'll see you later for some more beans, said Harry. Hagrid got out of there before Madam Prince could confront him. I'm going to snoop and see what section he was in, said Ron, who'd long given up of working any more that day. He came back a minute later with a pile of books in his arms and slammed them down on the table. Dragons. It's dragons, I tells ya, he cried. Hagrid was looking up stuff about dragons. Look at these, dragon sorts of Great Britain and Ireland, from egg to inferno, 157 ways a dragon can kill you and your family, how to train your dragon too. Hagrid's always wanted a pet dragon. He was quick to tell me so the first time I ever met him," said Harry. "But it's against the law," said Ron. "Dragon breeding was outlawed by the Warlocks Gentlemen's Agreement of 1709, everybody knows that. It's hard to stop moles from noticing us if we're keeping dragons in the back garden. Anyway, you can't train dragons. Contrary to what the movie says, it's dangerous. Half of Charlie's body got burned off while working with wild ones in Romania." "Are there dangerous wild dragons in Britain?" asked Harry. "Of course there are," said Ron. "Common Welsh green and Hebridean blacks. The Ministry of Magic goes through an awful lot of trouble to keep them a secret, I can tell you. Our kind have to keep putting spells on moles who've spotted them, to make them forget. Part of the whole social engineering department." "So is Hagrid looking to change jobs and apply to social engineering?" said Hormone. The others sat there in thought. When they banged on the door of the gamekeeper's hut an hour later, they were surprised to see that all the curtains were closed. Hagrid called, "Who is it?" followed by the cock of a shotgun before he let them in, and then slammed the door quickly behind them after giving one more peek outside to make sure they weren't being followed. It was unbearably hot inside. Even though it was such a warm day, there was a raging fire in the grate. Hagrid made some capo cheddar and offered them tuna sandwiches, which they firmly refused except Ron. "So, you wanted to ask me something?" "Yes," said Harry. "There was no point in beating around the bush. We would have come months ago, but the daily grind of school demoralized us and we just kept putting it off. You know how it goes. Anyway, we were wondering if you could tell us what's guarding the Sorcerer's Stone apart from Fuzzy." Harry took out a large sheet of parchment and a quill to take notes. Hagrid frowned at him. "Of course I can't," he said. "Number 1, I don't know myself, I'm just a lowly old custodian. Number 2, you know too much already, I could have you locked up if I wanted to. The information is classified. The bone's here for a reason. It was almost stolen out of Gringotts, I suppose you've worked that out and all. Beats me how you even know ab Fuzzy." "Oh, come on, Hagrid," they stumbled into his room while out exploring. "You might as well tell us, you know everything that goes on round here and it's impossible for you to keep a secret." "We'll crack you eventually," said Hormone in a warm, flattering voice. Hagrid's beard twitched and they could tell he was trembling in sweat. "We only want to know who had done the guarding, really," Hormone babbled on. "We want to know who Dumbledore trusts enough to help him, apart from you." Hagrid's chest swelled at these last words. Harry and Ron winked at Hormone. "Well, I don't suppose it could hurt to tell you that. Let's see. He borrowed Fuzzy from me. Then some of the teachers did security enchantments. Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, Professor Hardcastle McCormick. He ticked them off on his fingers. Professor Quirrell, and Dumbledore himself did something, and of course Professor Snape." "Snape? Question mark," they all yelled. "Yeah, I think that's everyone who showed up to last month's Bone Defender Council meeting. But you're not still on ob that, are ye? Look, Snape helped protect the bone, he's not about to pinch it." "But that's exactly what someone who wanted to steal the bone would do." Harry snarled, his blood now boiling. Harry wasn't sure Ron and Hormone were smart enough to think the same thing he was. "Are you guys pondering what I'm pondering? If Snape had been in on protecting the bone, it would have been easy to find out how the other teachers had guarded it. He probably knows everything, except, it appeared, Quirrell's spell and how to get past Fuzzy." "You're the only one who knows the secret of how to get past Fuzzy, aren't you, Hagrid?" said Harry impatiently. "And you wouldn't tell anyone, would you? Not even in a million years." "Not a soul knows except me and Dumbledore," said Hagrid proudly, pounding his chest. Harry muttered something to the others in a quick huddle. "Hagrid, can we have a window open? I'm sweltering," Ron said leaning back. "No can do, sorry," said Hagrid. Harry noticed him give a short peek at the fire. Harry looked at it, too. Hagrid, what intonation is that? In the very epicenter of the fire, underneath the kettle, was what looked like a huge green and white Yoshi egg. Said Hagrid, fiddling nervously with his thumbs, that's, Where did you get it, Hagrid? Said Ron, crouching over the fire to get a closer look at the egg which almost sheared his eyebrows off. It must have cost you a fortune. It did. Me entire life savings, in fact, said Hagrid. Last night, I was down in the village having a few pints and got into a conversation with a stranger. Said he had in his possession a dragon's egg and would be happy to sell it to me, for the right price o' course. That's when I offered him all I had, for fear someone else would put in an offer before I could seal the deal. But what are you going to do with it when it's hatched? Said Hormone. Well, I've been doing some research, said Hagrid, pulling a large film reel from under his pillow. Got this out of the library, How to Train Your Dragon. It's a bit out of date, of course, but it's all in here. Keep the egg in the fire, cause their mothers light the nest on fire, see, and when it hatches, feed it a bucket of vodka mixed with chicken wings every half hour. And of course, how to diagnose different eggs. What I got there's a Norwegian Ridgeback. They're really rare, them. He looked very satisfied with himself, but Hormone didn't. Hagrid, you live in a timber hut. Shall I call upon the fire brigade now to stand by for the inevitable? She said. But Hagrid acted like he wasn't listening, as he was humming merrily as he stoked the fire. So now they had something else to worry about. What might happen to Hagrid if this thing hatched in his sleep and burnt the place to the ground? Wonder what it's like to have a docile life, Ron sighed, as evening after evening they struggled through more and more of the extra homework they were getting. Hormone had now started making study schedules for Harry and Ron, too. And each time one was given to them, they were quick to toss it into the fire. It was driving them nuts. Then, one breakfast, Pigwiggy brought Harry another note from Hagrid. He had written only 2 words, "It's emerging." Ron wanted to skip herbology and go immediately down to the hut. Hormone wouldn't hear of it. We've got lessons, we'll get detentions, and that's nothing compared to what will happen to Hagrid once someone finds out what he's doing and they drag him off. Ron and Hormone argued all the way to herbology, and in the end, Hormone refused to skip class. Harry and Ron though dropped their trowels and hurried through the grounds to the edge of the forest. Hagrid appreciated them coming, looking flushed and in deeply need of help. It's nearly out. He shuffled them inside. The egg was lying on the table, wiggling around. Something was stirring inside, a funny clicking noise was coming from it which reminded Harry of a lighter. They all drew their breath and watched. All at once there was a scraping noise and the egg exploded open. The baby dragon flopped onto the table, mucus flying everywhere. It wasn't exactly pretty. Harry thought it looked like an ugly rat with wings. It had a long wide face with wide nostrils, and 2 huge green eyes with horns from its back to its nose. It coughed. A couple of sparks flew out of its snout and set Ron's sleeve on fire. "Isn't he beautiful?" Hagrid murmured, setting down the bucket which a moment ago was filled with water and was flung in Ron's direction. He reached out a hand to stroke the dragon's head. It dug its teeth into his fingers and wriggled them around. "Bless him, look, he knows his mommy," said Hagrid. "Hagrid," said Harry, "you're bleeding. How fast do Norwegian Ridgebacks grow anyway?" During the next week Harry, Ron, and Hormone spent all of their free time in Hagrid's charred hut, trying to reason with him. "Just let him go," Harry urged. "Set him free into the world." "I can't," said Hagrid. "He's too little. He'd die." They looked at the dragon. It had grown 10 times its length in just a week. Smoke kept furling out of its nostrils. Hagrid hadn't been doing his custodial duties because the dragon was keeping him so busy. Many toilets remain clogged, which caused long lines for bathroom breaks between classes. There were many empty vodka bottles and chicken bones all over the floor. Hagrid kept sucking on one of the bottles himself. Hagrid cleared his throat like he had something important to say. "I've decided to call him Norbert," said he, looking at the dragon with misty eyes. "He really knows me now. Watch. Norbert. Norbert. Where's Mommy?" The dragon scurried in the other direction towards some chicken wings that were not fully eaten of the bone. "Honestly, he's absolutely bonkers," Ron sputtered in Harry's direction. "Hagrid," said Harry loudly, "give it 2 weeks and Norbert's going to be longer than your house." Hagrid bit his lip. I know I can't keep him for eternity, but I can't just dump him off on the side of the road, I can't." The next day, Ron was bitten by Norbert while trying to clean out the litter box after Hagrid insisted he was sleeping. By their first class, Ron's bitten hand had swollen to 3 times its usual size. He didn't know whether it was safe to go to Madame Pom-Pom. Would she recognize a dragon bite? By the afternoon, though, he had no choice. The cut had turned a nasty shade of green and he started to develop dark red spots all over his body. It looked as if Norbert's fangs were now poisonous. Harry and Hermione rushed up to the hospital wing at the end of the day to find Ron in a terrible state in bed, wailing in pain. "I told her it was a bug bite, not sure if she believes me," Ron grinned with a dazed look on his face. "But if I die, promise me one thing. Promise me, Harry. Get rid that thing in Hagrid's hut before it has the taste for mammal blood. And I want you, Harry, to have all of my worldly possessions, except for Mr. Stuffles. I want to be buried with him." Harry and Hermione didn't know who or what Mr. Stuffles was, but they got out of there before Ron could say any more crazy things. Later on in the common room, Harry suddenly had a brilliant idea on what to do about Norbert. "Why don't we just slaughter the thing? You know, sneak into Hagrid's hut when it's sleeping and throw it off the tallest tower or something. Poof, no more dragon." "Brilliant," said Hermione. They got to work planning out a plan. The next night found Hermione and Harry sitting alone in the common room, long after everyone else had gone to bed. They stared into the fire contemplating on what they were about to do. They looked at one another. "Okay, so we've got the invisibility ring," said Harry. "It shouldn't be too difficult, and you already planted the crate outside Hagrid's hut, yes?" "Put it there just after dusk while everyone was at dinner," Hermione confirmed. Harry felt he had no choice but to reveal the existence of the invisibility ring to Hermione, as it was essential to their plan. "Perfect, let's move out." Harry slipped on the ring and grabbed Hermione's hand. They exited the room and made their way to the front entrance of the castle. Malfoy was there, waiting. "What's he doing here?" Hermione whispered. "Oh yeah, he wanted to come watch after I told him what we were about to do during supper. I didn't think it would be a big deal if he was able to meet us here." Harry had forgotten all about inviting Malfoy to tag along. He had mentioned it in passing at dinner while Hermione was off planting the crate. Said he was going to kill a dragon and that Malfoy could come along if he could make it to the front entrance by midnight, as he seemed quite interested in this. A lamp flared. Professor Hardcastle McCormick, in a tartan bathrobe and a hairnet, came quickly out from around the corner and instantly spotted Malfoy. "Detention!" she shouted and pointed at Malfoy, who was startled. "And 20 points from Slytherin. Wandering around in the middle of the night, how dare you?" "You don't understand, Professor. Harry Potter, he's got a dragon." "What utter rubbish. How dare you tell such lies? Come on, I shall see Professor Snape about you, Malfoy." She grabbed him by the ear and stormed off. Harry and Hermione, who remained invisible, just stood and watched the ordeal. When Professor Hardcastle McCormick's lamplight was out of sight, Harry gave a ha noise and they headed out of the castle and across the lawn towards Hagrid's hut. It was a very dark, cloudy night, with the dew already emerging on the grass. They slipped quietly towards the darkened hut, which meant that Hagrid was probably already asleep inside. They grabbed the crate hidden away near some bushes and approached the front door. Hermione used her unlocking spell and they slipped inside, still holding hands and remaining invisible. How they managed to get the dragon in the crate, they never knew. But lucky for them, it drank the sleeping potion Hermione had cooked up with great gusto. Once safely back outside again, Harry dropped the crate and took off his ring. Okay, change of plans. We can't toss this thing off the tower anymore, too many teachers roaming the halls as we've seen. We'll have to take it into the forest and kill it there. The forest? Hermione repeated. We can't go in there at night, there's all sorts of things in there, werewolves, I heard. We don't really have much of a choice now, do we? Besides, I know the perfect place, that pond where I saw Snape and Quirrell. He grabbed an axe leaning up against Hagrid's hut and pointed down a narrow, winding earth track that disappeared into the thick black trees. A light breeze lifted their hair as they crossed into the forest. The woods were black and silent. Then a sudden rustle in the bushes ahead of them made them almost drop the crate. They walked in silence, their eyes on the ground. Every now and then a ray of moonlight shone through the clouds and lit the path ahead of them. They walked on through the thick, dense trees. Harry kept twitching nervously over his shoulder. He had the nastiest feeling they were being followed. They walked past a mossy tree stump. Harry could hear running water, nearly there. Harry panted as they reached the pool of water where Harry saw the secret meeting. Man, I'm out of shape, said Harry as he and Hermione dropped the crate near the water's edge. I think it's still asleep. Why don't you open the lid and slide it out by its head there? Harry pointed near a rock. Hermione did as she was told. Harry lifted the axe above his head. Bye-bye, Norbert. Swoosh. The deed was done. Several birds took off from branches around them. The dragon's head was now slowly floating towards the center of the pond, blood pouring out of its neck heading in the same direction. Harry and Hermione had a moment of happy silence. Their problems were now solved, and not to mention probably saved Hagrid's life in the process. They then drug out the rest of the body and pushed it into the water. Hermione dismantled the crate and scattered it around the forest to remove all evidence, and Harry tossed the axe into the pond with a splash. They gave each other a high five and headed back out of the forest to return to the castle. After 2.5 hours of walking, they came to the realization that they were desperately lost. Panic started to sink in. They had no idea where they were. After walking a little farther on, Harry spotted something in the distance and approached with caution. It was white, that he could tell even in this darkest of night. Hermione thought it looked like a dead horse. But it wasn't a horse at all. It was the unicorn all right, but Hermione was right about the dead part. Harry had never seen anything so beautiful and sad or smelt anything as horrible. Its long, slender legs were stuck out and twisted at odd angles where it had fallen, and its eyes were still wide open. Harry peered around a rather large tree next to the dead animal and saw a whole clearing full of many other dead unicorns. There must have been at least 80 of them scattered about. Harry had taken one step toward them when a slithering sound made him halt where he stood. A bush on the edge of the clearing quivered. Then, out of the shadows, a hooded figure came crawling across on all fours like a baby. Harry and Hermione stood transfixed. The cloaked figure reached one of the unicorns, lowered its head and took a huge bite out of its neck and began to drink its sweet blood. The hooded figure suddenly stopped and raised its head. It looked right at Harry. Unicorn blood was dribbling down all over its front. It got to its feet and came swiftly toward Harry. He couldn't move for fear. Hermione, on the other hand, fainted with a screech. Ugh! Then a sting like he'd never felt before pierced Harry's head. It was as though he had the worst ice cream headache you could possibly imagine. Half blinded, he staggered backward and tripped over Hermione's unconscious body. He heard hooves behind him, galloping, and then something jumped clean over Harry, charging at the figure. Harry had missed the epic battle that ensued, for he too had passed out from the pain. When he became conscious, the figure had gone, but something new was standing over him. Was it a man or a horse? To the waist, a man, with red hair and beard, but below that was a horse's gleaming chestnut body with a long, reddish tail. Harry's jaw dropped. "It is I, Ronan, king of the centaurs," said the creature. "Are you in pain?" He bent down and felt Harry's forehead like a concerned mum. He had a deep, sorrowful voice. No, I'm quite all right now, thanks," said Harry, brushing away the centaur's hand. "Students, are you? And do you learn much, up at the school?" I try," said Harry timidly. "Mars is bright tonight, you know." Ronan stared unblinkingly upward, then sighed. "Mars is bright tonight," Ronan repeated. "Unusually bright." "Never mind Mars," insisted Harry. "What was that thing that attacked me?" The centaur didn't answer. He looked carefully at Harry, his eyes lingering on the scar that stood out, livid, now glowing a shade of green Harry's forehead. "You are the Potter boy, are you not?" he said. "The forest is not safe at this time, especially for you. Can you ride? It will be quicker this way." Harry sat up and started shaking Hormone back to consciousness. After further pleasantries were exchanged and Harry described what happened after she passed out, they both hopped up onto Ronan's back. A movement in the trees behind Ronan made Harry's neck curl again, but it was only a second centaur, black-haired and more wilder-looking than Ronan. "Ronan!" the second centaur thundered. "What are you doing? You have humans on your back. Have you no shame? Are you but a common mule?" "Bane, do you realize who this is?" said Ronan. "This is the Potter boy. The faster he departs the forest, the better." Bane looked skyward. "Mars is bright tonight," he said simply. So we've heard," said Harry. What have you been telling him?" growled Bane. "Remember, Ronan, we took an oath not to interfere in the dealings of man. Have we not read what is to come in our morning newspaper? If they wish to destroy themselves, so be it. More forest for the rest of us." Bane kicked his back legs in anger as Ronan trotted away. Harry and Hormone didn't have a clue what was going on. "Why's that guy so angry?" he asked. "What was that thing you saved us from, anyway?" "Harry Potter, do you not know why unicorns are slaughtered for their blood?" "No," said Harry, startled by the odd question. "We've only just used unicorn testicles in potions." "That is because it is such an unfair thing, to slay a unicorn," said Ronan. "One of the most one-sided fights you will ever see, as unicorns are so innocent and defenseless. But the blood of a unicorn will keep you alive, even if you are an inch from death, so long as you drink roughly a gallon per hour. However, you will never be fully cured and will be unable to stop drinking it from the moment the blood touches your lips." "But who'd be that desperate?" he wondered aloud. "If you're going to be cursed to keep killing unicorns and drinking 24 gallons of blood per day, death's better, isn't it?" "It is," Ronan agreed, "unless all you require is to stay alive long enough to have a drink of something else, something that will bring you back to full strength and supremacy, something that will ensure you can never die and not rely on an endless source of unicorns. Mr. Potter, do you not know what is hidden in the school at this very moment?" "The sorcerer's bone. Of course, the tonic of existence. Boy, this secret sure gets around. But I can't fathom who." "Good gracious, do I have to spell it all out for you, child? Can you not think of anyone who has waited many years to return to power, who has clung to life by slaughtering thousands of unicorns, awaiting the chance at the big time once more?" It was as though an iron fist had suddenly punched Harry in the gut. Hormone was strangely quiet this entire time, but Harry could tell she was deep in thought. "You don't mean," Harry gulped, "That was volume hormone!" shouted Harry, who felt her slip off sideways from Ronan's back and landed with a thud on the ground. "Quick! Give her some unicorn blood. She might be dead." "She is not dead, but merely fainted." "Fainted at the thought of you know perfectly well who I'm talking about's very real possible return." "I'm fine," said Hormone after coming to once again. "I just got a bit overwhelmed there, really." "This is where I leave you," Ronan murmured. "You are safe now. The edge of these woods is just over yonder." He turned and galloped back into the depths of the forest, leaving Harry and Hormone alone to ponder their thoughts. The important thing though was no more dragon. What could spoil that happiness? The answer however was waiting for them just inside the entrance hall. As they stepped through the door, Filch's face loomed suddenly out of the shadows. "Well, well, well," he whispered, "aren't we in a world of trouble?" They'd forgotten to put on the invisibility ring. Things were so bad it may have been Armageddon. "Oh yes. It'll be hard work and pain for you lot if I had anything to say for it. They are the best teachers if you ask me. It's the old-style punishments that I really enjoy when professors assign them. Hang you by your wrists from the ceiling for a few days in the dungeons, that'll teach you. I get the chains well oiled every night so they'll be ready when needed. And I'll be extra thorough tonight." He laughed with a grin. "Right, off we go then, and don't think of running off, now, it'll be worse for you if you do. I'm taking names. Got 'em in me head." Filch took them away to Professor Hardcastle McCormick's study where they sat and twiddled their thumbs without saying a word to each other for a good 40 minutes. Hormone was trembling. Excuses, alibis, and wild conspiracy theories chased around Harry's brain, each more sketchy than the last. He couldn't see how they were going to talk their way out of this one. They were done for. Harry might as well save him the trouble of being yelled at and just go start packing his bags now, he thought. How could they have been so stupid as to forget the ring? There was no excuse in the world that Professor Hardcastle McCormick would accept for their being out of bed and creeping around the school in the dead of night, let alone coming in from outside and from the Forbidden Forest no less if Filch had been watching them emerge from there, which was totally out of bounds. "I would never have believed any of you." Professor Hardcastle McCormick came bursting into the room, still in her bathrobe. She walked around them and sat down at her desk, fingers touching one another with a stern pose. "Mr. Filch has informed me he caught you stumbling in from the front lawn. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Enlighten me, what were you doing?" It was the first time Hormone had ever failed to answer a teacher's question. She was staring at her feet, as still as a statue. "I think I've got a good idea of what's been going on," said Professor Hardcastle McCormick. "It doesn't take a mastermind to work it out. You fed Draco Malfoy some cock-and-bull story about a dragon, trying to get him out of bed and into trouble. Well, good news, I've already caught him." "I'm disgusted," said Professor Hardcastle McCormick. 3 students out of bed in one night. It's unheard of. Never in all my years, nay, in the history of the school had there been such a thing. Mr. Potter, I thought Gryffindor meant more to you than this. You leave me no choice but to take 5 points away for your behavior. Believe me, Potter, it pains me to do it. As for you, Miss Granger, I thought you had more sense. You will receive detention and 1,000 points will be taken from Gryffindor." 1,000? Hormone gasped. There went their lead. The lead Harry won in the last Quidditch match. And it was all Hormone's fault. "Oh, you better believe it," said Professor Hardcastle McCormick, breathing heavily through her long, pointed nose. "Professor, please, you can't. Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Miss Granger. You're not my parents. Now back to bed, both of you. I've never been more ashamed of my Gryffindor students." She covered her eyes and looked down at the floor. 1,005 points lost. That put Gryffindor in dead last by a long shot. In one night, they'd ruined any chance Gryffindor had had for the house cup. Harry felt as though the floor had dropped out beneath him and he was falling, tumbling down like the points that had just been taken away. It was quite the belly whopper. Early the next morning, Ron was released from the hospital wing. He came straight to the dormitory before the sun even began to peep across the trees and roughly shook Harry awake, wanting to know how the previous night went. In a matter of seconds, though, Harry was wide-eyed and began to tell him what had happened in the forest down in the common room. Hermione soon joined them, still sleepy and in her pajamas. Harry couldn't sit down. He paced up and down in front of the fire. He was still shaking. Snape wants the stone for Voldemort. And Voldemort's been hanging out in the forest. And all this time we thought Snape just wanted to get stinking rich. Stop saying the name, said Ron as he cowered in terror and put pillows against both ears. Harry wasn't having any of it. Ronan saved me, but he shouldn't have done so. Bane was furious. He was talking about meddling with what the planets say is going to happen. They must show that Voldemort's coming back. Don't know why they wouldn't have known this years ago. I mean, you can calculate out exactly where the planets will be for the next 1,000 years if you wanted to. I mean, if you really can read the future by looking at the alignment of the planets, well then you should know everything that's going to happen, shouldn't you? Anyway, Bane thinks Ronan should have let Voldemort murder me. I suppose that's written in the stars as well. Will you stop saying the name? Ron moaned as if in pain. Harry went on, paying no mind to Ron. So all I've got to wait for now is Snape to steal the stone, Harry went on feverishly, then Voldemort will be able to come and finish me off. Well, I suppose Bane'll be happy. Hermione looked very frightened, but she had a word of comfort. Harry, everyone says Dumbledore's the only one you know perfectly well who I'm talking about was ever afraid of. With Dumbledore around, you know perfectly well who I'm talking about won't touch you. Anyway, who says the centaurs are all-knowing? Sounds like a bunch of gibberish to me. I mean, come on, reading the future based on the alignment of the planets and stars? Give me a break. The sky had turned bright before they stopped talking. They went to breakfast exhausted, their throats sore. Harry stopped just before the Great Hall. What would happen when the rest of Gryffindor found out what they'd done? At first, he heard Gryffindors who passed the giant hourglasses that recorded the house points thought there'd been a mistake. How could they suddenly have 1,005 points fewer than yesterday? And then the story started to spread. Hermione, every teacher's favorite pet, had lost them all those points. Sneering and jeering and glaring looks came from all over towards Hermione. There were many an insult thrown too, but they are far too harsh to print in this text, dear reader. To make matters worse, a note was delivered to Hermione at the breakfast table just before she finished scarfing down her sausage. Your detention will take place at 11 o'clock tonight. Meet Mr. Filch in the dungeon. Have a magical day. Professor Hardcastle McCormick. Second-in-command headmistress. Harry had forgotten all about Hermione getting detention in addition to the points they'd lost. He half expected Hermione to complain that this was a whole night of studying lost, but she didn't say a word. Hermione accepted her fate and felt that she got what she deserved. Harry continued to be one of the most popular and admired people at the school, but quickly learned to distance himself from Hermione. Even Viacom's and Hufflepuffles turned on her, because everyone had been longing to see Slytherin lose the House Cup. Everywhere Hermione went, people pointed and didn't trouble to lower their voices as they insulted her. Slytherins, on the other hand, clapped, whooped and hollered as she walked past them, yelling out things like "Thanks Granger, couldn't have done it without you." Only Neville stood by her. They'll all forget this in the near future. Ron's brothers Fred and George have lost millions of points for us in their years, and people still like them. Yeah, but they've always been part of the cool kids. And what am I? Nothing. I mean, look at me, we're here at the Great Hall and only you will sit within 20 feet of me, said Hormone miserably. Wait? Neville wasn't sure if that was meant to be some sort of insult. It was far too late to repair the damage caused by the atomic bomb Professor Hardcastle McCormick dropped on Hormone, so Harry just ignored her completely in the coming days and went about his business being the school celebrity. He also swore to himself not to go meddling in things that weren't his business from now on so that he would never find himself in Hormone's situation. These people can fend for themselves, why should I always be the one risking my neck to save their skins? He kept telling himself. Hormone had stepped her game up in class, insisting that she'd answer every question asked by her professors. Her thinking was that if the other students see how smart she is, they would lay off her and accept her as one of their own again. This plan greatly backfired, however, and made the students loathe her even more. She soon devoted every second of her free time to studying alone for the forthcoming exams, which kept her mind off her misery. She began working way longer into the night than she normally would, barely getting 2 hours rest, and it began to show. But there was just too much to do in trying to remember all the ingredients in complicated potions, learn hexes and spells by heart, and memorize the dates of magical mayhems and Hogwarts teacher rebellions. Harry, who had relied on Hormone for pretty much the entire year, was at a loss on where to even begin studying for the exams. And since he didn't want to be associated with Hormone, he was often seen blowing off his schoolwork running around in the grass enjoying the late spring sun. Then, about a fortnight prior to when the examinations were scheduled to commence, Harry's new resolution not to interfere in anything that didn't concern him was put to an unanticipated test. Walking towards his own personal washroom Dumbledore had given him near the start of school to wipe some grass stains off his robes from playing outside one afternoon, Harry heard somebody moaning in pain from the classroom up ahead. He decided to do a little detective work, and as he drew closer, he heard Quirrell's voice. Thank you, sir, may I have another? Smack. Thank you, sir, may I have another? Smack. It sounded as though someone was beating him after each thank you. Harry moved closer. All right, he heard Quirrell sniffle. Next second, Quirrell came hurrying out of the classroom, dropping his robes past his hips. He was pale and looked as though he was crying. He strode off with purpose. Harry didn't think Quirrell had even noticed him standing feet from the door. He waited until Quirrell's footsteps had disappeared, then he poked his head into the classroom. It was empty, but a door to the balcony across the room was flapping in the wind. He'd have gambled 1,200 silver sickies that Snape had just leapt from there, and from what Harry had just heard, Snape would be walking with a new spring in his step, if he didn't leap to his death, that is. Quirrell seemed to have given in at last. Harry walked outside and looked below. Not a body in sight, must have flown off on a broom or something, he thought. Harry went up to the Gryffindor common room after a quick pit stop in his private washroom, where Hormone was lecturing Ron on how he was going to fail astronomy. Harry told them what he'd overheard. So Snape's done it then, hasn't he? Said Ron. If Quirrell's told him how to break his anti-dark side of the Force spell, we're all doomed. Doomed. We need to go to the Dumbledore right away. Hormone screeched. No. There's still Fuzzy. We still got this situation under control, said Harry. Maybe Snape's found out how to get past him without asking Hagrid, said Ron, looking up at Harry. I bet there's a book out there somewhere telling you how to get past a giant three-headed dog. So what do we do, Harry? Both Ron and Hormone now stared at Harry, their undevout leader. The light of a new adventure now twinkling in Ron's eyes. If we just do a bit more poking around. No, said Harry flatly, we've done enough of poking around. We need action.